Okay, now let's start with comparative and superlative forms. Here we have three animals. The average maximum speeds of these animals are the following. The cat's maximum speed 48 kilometers per hour. Tigers 60 kilometers per hour. Cheetahs 120 kilometers per hour. A person can run like 20 kilometers per hour, so these animals are very fast in general. Okay, all of these animals are very fast. That's a characteristic that we can say about all of them. Okay, they are fast. Now let's start checking. For example, I can say that a cat is fast. Fast is an adjective. Adjectives are characteristics. This is describing the cat, essentially. Okay, that is the idea. This adjective is a description of the cat. It's a characteristic of the cat. And that's what we have with adjectives. Now, an interesting thing is that I can also compare the two animals. And I can say, for example, that a cat is fast, and that's true. But a tiger is faster. So in this case, you are comparing two things. It's one versus one. And that's the idea of the comparative form of the adjective. A comparative is just one thing. One versus one. You are comparing one person versus one person. Okay, it's individuals in a competition. For example, I can say Peter is taller, because that's a characteristic of Peter. Peter is taller in general. Or I can say that Peter is taller than Sam. If you mention the second person, you can use than to be more specific. Okay, so that's the idea of the comparative. Again, remember, the comparative is one versus one. A tiger is faster than a cat, obviously. The tiger is faster than a cat. That's a comparative form here. So you see, you're comparing one versus one. Now, there are some spelling rules that we have to follow. Okay, so for example, we have the situation here. New, newer. That is the general rule of a comparative form. You just have to put ER. Example, tall, taller. Fast, faster. New, newer. Okay, that's a general rule. Now, there are some special cases that we're going to see. Okay, one more case when you have just one syllable, but you finish with E. Nice. You don't say nice, you say nice. And for that reason, you don't have to add the E again. You just put R. Nice, nicer. There is one more case for one syllable. And this is a very important special case. When your adjective is one syllable and it finishes in consonant, vowel, consonant, in that specific case you have to duplicate the final consonant and then add ER. For example, hot, hotter. Okay, remember that. That's a special rule. That's a special rule. And that's it with one syllable. Now, beyond that, in general, if you have two syllables or more, this is something you're going to do. Okay, if you have two syllables or more, you're going to have this. The general rule is like this. So if it's one syllable, it's ER. But if it's two syllables, you're going to use more. Okay, you're going to use more. For example, formal, more formal. Formal has two syllables. Formal. So that's why you have to use it. But there is a little exception in this case. And the exception is here. Pretty. Pretty. Healthy. Healthy. In these two cases, you have two syllables. But this is the exception. Because you finish in Y, you're going to change the Y for IER. So the exception is that you have maximum two syllables and you finish in Y. That's a special case. So you have pretty, prettier, healthy, healthier. No more healthy, it's healthier. But if it doesn't finish in Y, it's just the general rule. More formal. Okay, more formal. More formal means that it's superior to the normal formality. You can also use, with the long ones, you can also use less. Instead of saying just more formal, you can say less formal. Less is an inferior. More is a superior. Less is an inferior. Okay, so don't forget that. But the two are possible. So in general, that's the rule, please remember. If it's more than 2 syllables, you have to use necessarily more or less. If it finishes in Y, you have the exception. So in general, if it's 3 syllables or more, in all the cases you're going to use more or less. Okay, necessarily, you have to use more or less. It doesn't matter anything else. Nothing else matters. And obviously, as it is English, there are some exceptions. Some of them are just irregular. So the comparative form is just irregular. So for example, good, better, bad, worse. And the last one is far, in a long distance. Further or farther. Both of them are correct. I personally prefer to use further, but if you want, you can use farther. The difference is more circumstantial, but in general, they are both the same. So that's it. So please remember, in general, if it's 1 syllable, ER, and if it's 2 syllables or more or less. There are special exceptions, but that's not very important at the moment. And obviously, there are the irregular ones. There are only these 3 irregulars, so there's no more than that. You don't have to memorize more irregulars than these 3. Okay, so that's it. That's the idea of the comparatives. Remember, a comparative is 1 versus 1. Peter is taller than Sam, or is taller. Okay, so that's the idea. Comparatives are 1 versus 1. But let's expand a little bit this. And one more extra thing, if you want to emphasize that the difference is very big, because look, the difference between the two is very, very big. Sam probably is a child, and Peter is like a basketball player, probably. He's very, very tall. So when the difference is very, very big, you can use much. Much is an adverb that modifies the comparative. So don't say more taller. No, it's much taller. Okay? You can even use it for other situations. For example, a diamond. That's too small. A diamond is much more expensive than plastic. Okay, so the much is an adverb that modifies the comparative. You can use it also in these situations. Okay, so don't forget, please, the comparative form with than, and if you want to exaggerate the difference much more, you can say much. Okay, that's it with comparatives. Now let's continue with superlatives. A cat is fast, and a tiger is faster. But look at the cheetah in comparison. If we compare the cheetah versus all the other animals, the cheetah is the fastest animal of all the land animals. So if we compare the 3, this is the fastest. This is also a characteristic of the cheetah, but this is the superlative. The superlative is different from the comparative because it is 1 versus all, or versus a group. In this case, look, Peter. We are going to compare Peter versus everybody else in the class. Peter is the tallest because not only he is very, very tall, but if you compare him versus all the other individuals in the class, he is the tallest. Look, this next person is very short in comparison. So he is the tallest of the class. it is an extreme. Superlatives represent the extremes of the spectrum. Okay, that's the idea. And there are very similar rules of spelling to the comparative. In the case of the comparatives, you have the same restrictions as with the superlative. So, for example, for one syllable, in general, it's the est. So instead of saying new, it's the newest. But an important thing here, you have to mention the. If you don't mention the, you are not going to have the complete superlative. So you have to say Peter is the tallest. You cannot omit the in your sentences, okay? It is an extreme. That's why you don't compare it necessarily versus everybody else, because he is already the extreme. Another example. Nice, the nicest. Hot, the hottest. The same rule, because you have consonant, vowel, consonant. Because of that, you have to duplicate the final consonant. The same exceptions as the comparative. Pretty, the prettiest. Healthy, the healthiest. More formal, the most formal. Or if you want to use the under extreme, you can say the least formal. Okay? And for 3 syllables, the same. Expensive, the most expensive. The least expensive. Unhappy, the most unhappy. The least unhappy. Okay, so remember that, please. You can use the most or the least for superlatives. And again, the superlatives of the irregulars. For good, the best. Bad, the worst. Far, the furthest. Or you can also say the farthest. But I prefer to use this one most of the time. So those are the same. They have the same rules. The only difference is that for the superlative you have to say the est. The est for all the cases. That's the grammar, the spelling rule in this case. So we can conclude. A cat is fast. A tiger is faster. Or we can say it's faster than a cat, if you want to be more specific. I can also use the extreme form of the comparative. I can say a cheetah is much faster than a tiger. But in all of these cases, remember, you're using the comparative. So that means that you're using the comparison between one versus one. You're using one individual versus one individual. The cheetah versus the tiger is only 1 versus 1. And the superlative. A cheetah is the fastest animal of all. Because you're comparing a cheetah versus all the universe, versus all the elements of the group. Okay, so that's essentially the idea of comparatives and superlatives. We have, all of them are variations of an adjective. They are a form of an adjective, and they all describe a person or an animal or a thing. But they have different uses. Remember, the comparative is 1 versus 1, and the superlative is 1 versus all, the extreme. And that's it. Okay, so please wash your hands and see you soon. Bye.